Today on How To Automotive, we're working on a 2002 through 2013 Infiniti G35. We're going to be replacing the cam and crank sensors on this vehicle. So come with me and I'll walk you step by step through the process of swapping those out. So this vehicle had a code for a crank sensor P035, which is a crankshaft position code. This vehicle also would intermittently stall. These are very common problems with the cam and crank sensors malfunctioning, especially when the vehicle gets hot. We were unable to duplicate it when we were checking it out, so we went ahead and recommended replacing them. Here are the parts we used. I will link these up in the description of the videos. The two on the left are the cam sensors here, and then the one on the right is the crank sensor. I'll link all these part numbers in here. Later on in the job, I found out that the right cam sensor was the wrong one, so I had to swap it out for a new one. This will all be linked in the description of the video. That way, if you need to pick any of these up, you can find those links there. The first thing we need to do is get the vehicle up in the air. If you're doing this at home, use floor jacks and jack stands and jack them up on the jack points. Then we need to take off the lower skid plates or splash shields. On this vehicle, they were missing. You're just going to go around the perimeter of the shields and remove the fasteners, and the shield will drop down. Once the shield is dropped down, then we have access to the crank sensor, which is fairly easy. It's right here behind the exhaust manifold on the back of the transmission bell housing here. We're going to start by unplugging it. The first thing we need to do is squeeze the little connector here and pull straight down. You don't want to pull from the wires, pull from the plastic housing. That way you don't damage the connector. Now you can remove the 10mm bolt holding the crank sensor in. Once you get the bolt removed, then you can go ahead and pull the crank sensor straight down and out. Now we're ready to reinstall the crank sensor, so we're just going to slide it back into position, and then once we got it slid all the way in until it's fully seated, we can go ahead and start the 10mm bolt here, and then run that down until it's snug. And now when I tighten these up, I just run them down to they're snug with a 1/4 inch ratchet here, and then about a 1/4 turn more. And then once that's done, I go ahead and plug the connector back in, and then you can go ahead and put the lower splash shields and covers back on. If you're only changing the crank sensor, you can go back up top, go ahead and clear out your codes, and the job is done. If you're doing the cam sensors like we're doing on this job, we're going to start by pulling the top engine cover off here by removing the 10mm fasteners. There's 4 of them around the perimeter of the cover. On the passenger side of the vehicle will be the camshaft position number 1. This one's in a tight area, a little hard to see and a little hard to get your fingers down there, but I'll get the camera down there so you guys can see what I'm talking about. So as we get back here on the back of the cylinder head, you can see the green connector here. That is our cam position sensor. We need to get that out. I like to leave it plugged in and unbolt it and then remove it. It makes it a little bit easier. To do that, I just use a standard 10mm wrench here, crack the fastener free a few threads, and once it was cracked free a few threads, I was able to reach down there and spin the bolt out with my fingers. So like I said, after I loosened up it a few times with the wrench, then I reached around the back side like this and was able to get my fingers on there and screw the bolt out. It is a little tight back here and a little awkward to work in this position, but a little patience, you'll get that bolt out. Now you should be able to reach back here and pull on the connector, not the wires, and the sensor itself, and wiggle it and pull it straight out like this. And then once you get it fully out, then you should be able to pull the sensor and wire up over the top of the wiring harness and up towards the top of the engine, and then you'll have access to unplug it up top. Now you can squeeze the tab and then pull the cam sensor out of the plug. Now we're ready to install the cam sensor. What I do is I put a little bit of silicone-based grease on the O-ring here. That helps it slide into place and not damage the O-ring, and also prevents it from leaking. If you use a petroleum base, it could swell the O-ring and you can potentially get a leak. So now I'm going to plug the sensor back in over here and then route the sensor back over and under the wiring harness below, and then I'll push it in. Also, before I install, I'm going to wipe out the housing here where the old sensor was to make sure there's no debris and oil leaking out here, to clean that up before we install the new sensor. With the sensor already plugged in, I routed it over the back side of the wiring harness and underneath it, and then put it through the little port that we took it out of and push it in. And you kind of want to twist and rotate it to help seat it in there. And you also want to line up the 10mm bolt hole. To get the bolt started, I held it in my left hand on my thumb and forefinger like this, went around the back side, and then I was able to reach in there and install it It's kind of difficult, and there's a possibility of dropping, so you want to have a magnet close by to maybe find it where if you dropped it. This is the hardest part of it, is restarting the bolt here. This is where you need a little bit of patience and just work with it. So you may have to twist the sensor left or right to help line up that bolt hole once you get it in there. Once you get the bolt run in as far as you can by hand, now you can just go ahead and take your wrench and run it in and tighten it up. You know, all you want to do is just run it into a snug and about a quarter turn more, and you're good. Now we're going to work on bank 2 cam sensor. So we need to get the air snorkel portion of it out here. So go ahead and loosen up the clamps on the air snorkel, and we're going to pull this out. So you're going to loosen up the 2 clamps on the air snorkel here. And then once you get those loosened up, then there's going to be a vent hose here on the side of the snorkel. With a pair of pliers, we're going to squeeze the squeeze clamp and then pull the inlet pipe off here. Now that we got the air inlet out of the way, we're going to remove the throttle body. We're going to leave the throttle body plugged in. We're just going to remove the 4 5mm Allen bolts. So you're going to need a 5mm Allen socket. So go ahead and remove those 4 fasteners. On the back lower one, I had to switch over to a hand ratchet to get to it. A little tight back here, so just go ahead and remove these fasteners. Now you can take the throttle body off with it still connected and push it off to the side and out of our way. The throttle body has a metal gasket, and most of the time they can be reused unless it's been damaged. If it has been, go ahead and order a new one. The vent line that we took off of the air snorkel here is attached right here on the top of the valve cover. It's easier to take this off now and get this out of our way to make room to get our hands back here to disconnect the cam sensor. So I just squeezed the tab and pulled it straight out and off. You can see it right here, right underneath the valve cover right here. To unbolt it, I used a 10mm socket, and a ratchet here is a deep socket here. You can see where I put it on there. Now you can go ahead and crack this free like this. Once you get it spun loose a few times, now you should be able to reach your hand down here and spin the bolt out by hand. I used a flat blade screwdriver on the cam sensor and gave it a little pry to help get it loose, and then pulled it off by hand like this and pulled it out. There's a lot more room on this side than the other side, so this shouldn't be too hard. So the cam sensor on the driver's side had a little 45-degree angle, and on the passenger side it was straight. The parts guy sent me 2 straight ones, but it does require the 45-degree angle one. So if you get one that's straight, go back and order the one with the 45-degree angle. Here's the part number that I had to reorder to get the right sensor for. I will link this up in the description of the video. Just like we did on the opposite side, you want to put a little bit of a silicone based grease on the O-ring. Go ahead and slide it back into the place. Also wipe out the area, make sure it's free of debris. And then once you got that installed, then you can go ahead and install the bolt, run it in until it's snug, and then tighten it up about a quarter turn more. And then after that, you can plug in the electrical connector. Now that the cam sensor is plugged in and bolted up, we can go ahead and put the vent line here back on, put the squeeze clamp back on here, and tuck this out of our way. And after we get that put on, we're going to put the throttle body back on. So I lined up the throttle body with the way it came off back in the position, took the metal gasket here, slid it in between, and then took one of the 5mm Allen bolts here, slid it through, and started here in the corner. As you can see, I'm using my fingers to hold the gasket, and then I'll slide another bolt through. And then once I get the bolts through the gasket and through the throttle body, then I'll line it up with the intake and start the bolts. I like to start all 4 of the bolts before I start tightening them down. So I'll start all 4 bolts, and then I'll run them in until they're snug, and then I'll do a crisscross pattern, and I'll tighten them up about a quarter turn more. So I'll start at one corner and then go to the opposite corner, and then go opposite corner, opposite corner. And like I said, I just run them in until they're snug and about a quarter turn more. You don't need a lot of torque on these. There's no fluids or anything flowing through it, just air. So this metal gasket seals it up quite well. So go ahead and snug up all 4 of the bolts. Now you can go ahead and install the air snorkel here. We'll make sure that the vent line here is routed to the back here. Go ahead and plug that in, put the hose clamp on, and tighten up the 2 clamps. After you get the clamps all tightened up, then you can go ahead and put the top engine cover on. You're just going to line that up with the top of the intake manifold and the oil cap here. That helps line it up. Once you get them all lined up, you start the 4 fasteners and go ahead and run those down until they're snug. After that, you can clear out the codes. I will leave links for all the parts that I used in this video in the description of the video. I'm Brian Esser from How To Automotive. I'd like to thank you guys for watching. Encourage you to subscribe. Invite you to head over to the howtoautomotive.com website for more valuable videos like this. Thank you again for watching.